You guys, I'm sorry. Okay? I'm sorry. I am sorry. But I'm overseas, and I actually have been since the beginning of the year pretty much. It's been hectic. I'm trying to find a secondary place outside of Australia to potentially call home. And I don't even know what's heads or tails at this point, okay? So I'm taking scraps. And Meghan Markle is nothing if not a scrap making machine. So yes, unfortunately, we're covering episode 2 of her podcast today. This episode's guest is Rashma Sojani, another woman whom I had never heard of before, but my approach to this episode was different. For the first episode with Whitney, I listened first and researched Whitney later. I reversed the process this time around, which really worked out for the better because I was able to sit back and laugh out loud and roll my eyes at almost every single thing that Rashma Sojani said because I knew a lot more about her. And I'll tell you what, I'm starting to think that to land a spot on Meghan's podcast, or maybe even in her circle of friends, you're going to have to be a little bit psychopathic.
Today's episode is about fighting for what you believe in. And that's precisely why I wanted to talk to Rashma Sojani. She founded not one, but 2 incredible nonprofits that help close the gender gap for women.
To start off, the blurb is completely off the mark, it's inaccurate, and it's false. I don't want to spoil it. You're going to find out why it's false. She talks about how these 2 not-for-profits close the gender gap and all that. That's misleading. It's a way to hook you into the episode. Because surprise, surprise, remember what we went through in the first episode where basically they barely scratched the surface and just gossiped? It's pretty much more of that today.
How did you end up at that meeting with me?
Because you're an amazing human.
Oh my
and it's true.
All we really get about Reshma's background in this podcast is really the origin story of how her parents came to the United States.
My parents came here as refugees. They had no money, and the Catholic Church took them in.
Now, look, you'll call me a cynic, I'm sure, for saying this, but it's almost as though every single elitist nowadays comes pre-packaged, like it's a starter pack, with the usual rags to riches backstory. Now, I'm not saying that Reshma's parents didn't go through it, but after covering these types of people for a while now, I mean, come on, Meghan literally tried to rewrite her whole childhood in the public eye as some poor latchkey kid. You're going to have to forgive the cynicism. Especially when she was caught red-handed doing just that, erasing her history and rewriting it for her failed 2013 political campaign. According to an article in Salon from 2013, the Sojani campaign confirmed that they vanity edited the Wikipedia page to remove negative information, a violation of Wikipedia's conflict of interest policy. And this negative information was basically her entire work history on Wall Street. Anyways, let me take over the reins from here and introduce you to Reshma, because Meghan, as ever, fails to do her job adequately. However, we will be dipping back into the podcast for sound bites every now and then for illustrative purposes. Rashma Sojani is a lawyer, a failed politician. She's authored a few books, which seem to have done not too badly, actually, looking at the ratings, the reviews. Don't know if you can fake reviews on Amazon or ask your friends and family, but I wouldn't put it past her, knowing what I know about her now. She's also, as Meghan mentioned, the founder of 2 not-for-profits, Girls Who Code, which she no longer works at, but still gets paid by. We'll get into that. And a charity called Moms First. Oh, and she actually also has her own Lemonada podcast called My So-Called Midlife, which is, again, rated quite highly like her books, but doesn't seem to be all that popular. Although I did come across this really funny review that says, please stop advertising your tragic vanity project. Was that for Meghan or for Reshma? Again, whether these reviews are genuine or paid or family and friends, I don't know. I know I'm sounding a little bit cynical, but when you come across things like Reshma being a holistic wealth trailblazer at the Kesha Blair Institute on Holistic Wealth, where they charge $2,000 to become a certified holistic wealth consultant? Are you really being a cynic, or are you calling out an actual con artist here? I mean, come on, ladies. Which ironically, Reshma says at some point in this podcast is her favorite thing to do.
Well, listen, I love exposing cons.
According to her LinkedIn, she graduated from the University of Illinois with a BA in political science, followed by a Master of Public Policy in Political and Economic Development from the Harvard Kennedy School, and finally, a much coveted law degree from Yale. Now, the story behind this particular degree is what made me think that Reshma has antisocial tendencies. I mean, in the psychological sense of some semblance of psychopathy. But listen to her explain how she tried and failed numerous times to get into Yale.
I'm looking at all these people like a Hillary, and they all got a degree from Harvard and they're all lawyers. And so maybe that's my path, right? I'm going to Yale Law School. That's where I'm going.
I had to pause here because I really wanted to point out how this is a very common theme with Reshma and something that she most definitely has in common with Meghan. Nothing seems to be an organic, I hate that word now, thanks Meghan, a genuine interest or passion of hers. It's not like she's always wanted to be a lawyer since her youth, or she was always good at the debate team, or her parents told her you'd make a great lawyer because you argue back so much. I might be, letting you into a little of my life there. But point being, she's always trying to emulate other people. Which, all right, I mean, it might not be the worst thing if that's how you want to live your life, but you'll soon find out that you can't stick to things if you choose to do it the Reshma and Meghan way. But let's carry on.
So I had this mentor, Leon Higginbotham Jr. He was like the first federal Black jurist. And Leon's like, oh, girl, you're getting in. Like, I got you. And he dies. And he doesn't write my recommendation letter.
She did say not a few seconds ago that
I love Leon.
She was at his house every Sunday.
Every Sunday, I am at him and Evelyn's house.
And all she cared about when he passed away was the fact that he didn't write her a reference letter. But it gets worse.
At the funeral, I meet the assistant of the dean of Yale Law School. She feels sorry for me, and she was like, I'll get an appointment for you.
Did you get that? She used a dead man's funeral. I mean, obviously it's a dead man's funeral, but she used a funeral as an opportunity to hustle. You see any parallels here? Meghan going off to Uvalde to use dead children to promote herself and her own image, going off to California, walking on people's, the leftovers of their homes, their ashes, their lives, just to make herself look like a humanitarian. What did I say last week about birds of a feather? Am I right or am I right? I mean, maybe that's what this series needs to be called. And besides mentioning it on Meghan's podcast, Reshma actually makes a joke about this entire story in 2017 during a Harvard Graduate School of Education convocation speech that she gave.
My obsession with perfection, with pedigrees and credentials, it was a dead end. Like, it literally led me to a funeral.
This woman, I mean, I'm sure you can see why I decided to sink my teeth into this one and make a video. I wasn't going to be honest. If the episodes aren't worth talking about, then they're just not worth talking about. But I couldn't pass this woman up. Anyways, back to her career trajectory. She started her career as a lawyer at an elite law firm in New York called David Polk and Wardell, before having a few stints in asset management and hedge funds, so basically Wall Street, up until the global financial crisis of the late 2000s, which is when she likely decided to abandon ship. Interestingly, if you look at her track record overall, she hops from job to job every year, year and a half or so, sometimes less. I mean, at her second job, Carrot Asset Management, that was less than a year. So that's never a good sign. It does start to raise some red flags in the sense of, are you a problematic person? Do you not know what you want? Remember what I said at the start? Reshma's someone who just doing things to see what sticks, doing things to see how she can get to the pinnacle, like the Hillary Clintons. She's obsessed with Hillary Clinton, by the way.
A mentor, I met her when I was 20 years old.
I've been following her ever since, literally.
And speaking of which, she was also trying to emulate Hillary Clinton.
The minute those words came out of your mouth, I looked at my husband and I was like, I guess I know what I'm doing now.
But in 2009, as listed on her LinkedIn, she randomly decided to run for office.
So a few years ago, I did something really brave. I ran for Congress.
Now, unfortunately for Reshma, and perhaps fortunately for the United States, that turned out to be a failure of a campaign.
I had like hustled the whole world, right, into thinking that like I'm winning this upstart race.
Right.
And it is not even close. Like I'm crushed.
And the same papers that said I was a rising political star now said I wasted $1.3 million on 6,321 votes. Don't do the math.
And if you look at her LinkedIn, she actually writes about this failure in a huge paragraph, which seems to be almost a word-for-word transcript of what she ended up saying at her TED Talk in 2017. So rehearsed much, just like Meghan.
And Leon's like, oh, girl, you're getting in. Like, I got you.
He was like, don't worry, Reshma. I got you. You will get in.
I love Leon.
I loved Leon.
But at the very end, she says, and you? Which setback set you forward? Inspire others. Share your proudest failure with #WorthItResume, #L'Oreal Paris. Somebody please tell me she's joking. Like, she's got to be joking, right? And speaking of her TED Talk, that was my first exposure to Reshma ever. And I kid you not when I say that it took me about 5 seconds to understand exactly why she and Meghan are such good friends.
I grew up in Schaumburg, Illinois.
It was several years ago in 2014 that I was first invited to be a counselor at One Young World.
One time I punched a bully in the face who called me a Haji.
I was probably a lot like each of you,
In school, I found my own advocacy organization.
advocating for the things I deeply and profoundly believed in.
I led my first march when I was 12 years old.
And there I was the girl from Suits.
By high school, I was pretty much set on what I wanted to do with my life.
And I was invited to pull up a seat at the table.
I dreamed of working in politics and social justice.
I was so overwhelmed by this experience, I think I even saved my little paper place card that said my name on it.
So I decided I'd go to the best law school in the country,
It's just proof. Proof that I was there.
graduate in the top of my class, and run for office.
And proof that I belonged.
See what I mean? I even noticed in her lingo, it's very much us versus them, people of color versus the whites. White man bad.
Now, I'm not a historian, but I've been thinking about those other revolutions, and it turns out they have some things in common. Oh yeah, they were led by white guys.
But anyways, after all that floundering about, Confessions of a Female Flounder, I saw that on the internet. But after all those attempts, which included yet another failed attempt at politics, you've got to give it to her, the woman's tenacious, much like Meghan, Reshma finally seems to get a spaghetti, or should I say noodle, as Meghan likes to call it,
Heaps of noodles.
strand to stick on the wall when she founded Girls Who Code, a not-for-profit organization established in 2011 and which she stepped down from as CEO in 2021. A few interesting things about Girls Who Code. First, Reshma doesn't even come from a STEM background. She doesn't even know how to code, as she admits.
I didn't code. I'd never coded before.
So why STEM? A question which Meghan surprisingly manages to ask.
I saw that girls and girls of color, poor girls, were not going into these fields. In my mind, they weren't going into the fields that would help them march up into the middle class.
Okay, first of all, she says that she noticed that girls weren't going into STEM, as if that's not a very well-known, very deeply established fact. And secondly, she talks about pushing them into higher paying jobs, which according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, STEM occupations are actually quite highly paid. If you look at the median annual wage dollars as at 2023, that's quite a discrepancy between STEM and non-STEM occupations. And in case anyone's wondering, by the way, no, lawyers don't get paid very well. Unless you're either partner or a lawyer without a life who's on the verge of insanity because they're working a very high-powered corporate job and they don't even know what sleep is anymore. But I digress. The whole point of Girls Who Code was to close the gender gap. Remember how Meghan mentioned that?
She founded not one, but 2 incredible nonprofits that help close the gender gap for women.
Except it didn't. That was a lie. You were lied to in that blurb. Because data actually shows that at best, the share of women in STEM graduates has been stagnant over these past 10 years. As you can see here, as of August 2023, apparently only 31 out of 100 students who take core STEM subjects in higher education in the UK are women. And in some cases, particularly the demographic that Reshma claims to focus on, women of color, the numbers have actually gotten worse. According to ED Trust, STEM doctoral degree attainment among Black women decreased from 1.3% to 1.1% between 2010 to 2019. And from 2010 to 2019, Black women earned more doctoral degrees overall, but fewer STEM doctoral degrees as a group. And the same can be said for Latina women. From 2010 to 2019, Latinas earned more doctoral degrees overall, but fewer STEM doctoral degrees. So closing the gender gap, Girls Who Code did not. I don't know why I said that like Yoda. And I can actually speak from personal experience here. I did a master's in information technology and a master's in science majoring in mathematics, and I can confirm that there is a huge discrepancy when it comes to female and male enrollments. However, interestingly, one of the data points or the charts points out that this doesn't really seem to be the case in countries such as India and even Arabic countries. According to UNESCO, there were 9 countries where the majority of STEM graduates were female, notably Arab states such as the Syrian Arab Republic and Tunisia. High shares of female STEM graduates in Arab countries coincide with lower mathematics anxiety. I just found that to be an interesting tidbit. It's really neither here nor there, although I do wish that they got into exploring this topic, since Reshma professes to be some type of an expert, seeing as she ran a not-for-profit that closed the gender gap over the last 10 years. Now, I don't expect Reshma or Girls Who Code to single-handedly change the tide and close the gender gap. But what I have a problem with is, for the 9 out of 10 women who listen to this podcast, the impression they're probably going to be left with if they don't do the extra research, which they shouldn't have to and nobody expects them to, is that Reshma succeeded in closing the gender gap and all of her platitudes about bravery actually paid off. When in reality, the only thing that seems to have paid off is that fat paycheck that she received and continues to receive from Girls Who Code for over a decade now, since its inception. In 2021, she got paid $206,454 in total compensation. In 2020, she got paid a reportable compensation of $178,257 plus $43,520 in the form of other compensation from either the organization itself or other related organizations. This goes on all the way back to 2014. In fact, in 2019, this woman made a killing when she got paid, brace yourselves, $404,000 plus $52,000 in other compensation. So apart from the startup years of 2012, 2013, when she didn't pay herself anything, this wasn't exactly a working for free or getting paid pennies kind of gig for Reshma. And apart from paying off financially, Reshma also used Girls Who Code for political purposes and lobbying efforts, as declared in her 990 form. Now, we don't know exactly what these activities are because they're listed under other activities in Schedule C. But for instance, in 2021, you can see that the organization spent almost $230,000 for political lobbying purposes. And this is not the only year. Again, I'm just pulling up examples because we're running on limited time here and I'm sure all of us are going to get bored at some point. In case you're interested, New York does have guidelines for not-for-profits in terms of what type of political activities they can engage in and what types they cannot. But I'm going to assume that whatever they're doing meets these guidelines. It is still a little bit iffy. Now, shock of shocks. Meghan actually manages to ask another pertinent question. One that I'm sure everyone who aspires to start a business or a non-for-profit, any organization, is dying to know.
How do you get funders?
So here's the thing. I very early on at Girls Who Code got Jack Dorsey to support it. And back then, everybody was like, oh, Jack's doing it? Great.
There's your answer, folks. Be well connected. Oh, and have a rich husband to boot. Turns out that Reshma's married to quite the loaded guy. His name is Nahal Mehta. I found his LinkedIn, and his entire LinkedIn history is basically either a co-founder or an angel investor. And angel investors are usually high net worth people who have money and are benevolent enough, that's why they're called angel investors, to give money to new startups, untested startups that they believe in, that they want to back, that they want to see succeed. And of course, they get returns on investment. So basically, she's not only well connected, but she's also loaded. Now, when it comes to Moms First, Reshma's second charity, she actually credits Meghan for the charity's takeoff.
And I'll say with Moms First, it was you. For Moms First, it was you and Melinda.
And because Meghan doesn't know how to do her job, or at least I think she doesn't, because I only listened to the podcast once this time, I had to go do my own research. So I found their website, and the goal is to transform workplaces, communities, and cultures to enable moms to thrive. When I wanted to dig deeper, because these blurbs are never good enough for me, guess what? I couldn't. Because in order to do that, in order to actually download their reports and their findings and read the data, I had to give them my personal information. Every time you hit that download button, it takes you straight down to the bottom of the page and tells you, cough it up. As the saying goes, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And by the way, if you, like me, don't want your personal information being out there, bought and sold like a commodity, then do consider using a service called Incogni, an organization that will fight the good fight and deal with those pesky data brokers to get them to delete your data on your behalf all over the internet on a continuous basis. I have a discount code for 60% off an annual plan linked in the description box if you are interested in protecting your data and your privacy. So go get it before the Meghans and the Reshmas of the world continue to make money by invading your privacy. The irony of it all, will it ever cease? Interestingly, Meghan's letter to Congress back in 2021, where she literally lied about her background as a child and going to the $5 Sizzler salad bar thing, Moms First actually got behind that letter and applauded Meghan for her efforts. Efforts which, by the way, led to nowhere, something which they conveniently failed to discuss on the podcast. I'd also like to point out that Meghan has demonstrated an ability to be consistent, at least on one aspect of her life, her signature, which you can see here from all the way back in 2021, was as ever. I tried looking up the tax filings of Moms First, and I couldn't. They don't exist. What I did find, though, is that Reshma continues to be paid by Girls Who Code, technically, as CEO of Moms First, which tells me that Moms First is some kind of a subsidiary of Girls Who Code, and I'm sure that's done for a very particular reason, with one of them clearly being opacity, because now I can't really see anything about this organization, can I? And Meghan didn't really do anything on her podcast to help shed light on what this organization does, other than this really naive and really out of touch, typical straight out of Planet Elite conversation that they have about wanting to give women ownership of their time.
I feel like the way that we've built workplaces, we've set women up to fail. If we can actually give people grace and flexibility and give women ownership over their time, you will actually see a shift.
Mm-hmm.
Put your hands up if you are a woman who is employed, working for a company, who thinks that she can just rock up to her boss and ask for more flexible hours so that she can take care of her children. Now, if you answered yes, put your hand up and tell me if you're still gonna have that job after you've made these requests, especially if you've made them more than once. I mean, how realistic is this? And how helpful is it? Are we not gonna talk about the fact that if women start insisting on this, employers will simply start hiring men all the more? If they knew that they had to legally give women more flexibility, why on earth would they hire more women? It just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. And it only tells me again that these women, these two women, have no idea what it's like to live in the real world. Some honorable mentions before we end the podcast, because why not? We made it this far, right? Hashtag L'Oreal Paris, you're worth it if you made it this far. What am I doing with my life? We get this ultimately relatable moment with a capital R that I am sure all you working moms or even stay-at-home moms can absolutely identify with.
Oh my gosh, I love being a mom so much. It's my favorite thing. It is the thing where you're like, oh my gosh, I just need a break. I just need a minute. I just need a minute. And the second that you step in the other room, you go, oh,
Where are they?
okay. Let me scroll through pictures of them endlessly on my phone.
Look, I'm not a mom, but you all do have time to scroll endlessly when you're tired from your kids, right? And also, who takes care of the kids when they're in the other room as you're endlessly scrolling? Oh, is it the same person who took care of them when Meghan went off to New York with a 4 SUV mini motorcade to watch a Broadway show while Harry was cosplaying some kind of a doctor in Ukraine? At one point, you won't believe this, Meghan actually learns a new word.
No, just be honest.
And at the very end of the episode, Reshma compares herself and Meghan Markle to the suffragettes of the 20th century.
I've realized that probably me, you, were put on this earth just like those suffragettes to just keep hope alive.
Yeah, just as much as Gayle King and Lauren Sanchez and Katy Perry are astronauts, right? I've been looking into making a video about that too, by the way. Stay tuned. And finally, because we always have to leave on a high note, Meghan, never to be outdone, drops this gem.
What's behind every successful woman is self-awareness. Self-awareness.
And on that note, I think we'll end it here because I've got another lobotomy appointment scheduled because clearly one isn't enough.